I want to give a quick shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you so much for all of the continued support. And I am done. Okay, so I just got finished reading The Way of Edan. This is part of the Edan trilogy by Philip Chase, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts on finishing this book, which was just right now. So I like this one. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 stars, which is the definition of me liking a book. And I'm, pleasantly surprised by what I read here. It was good stuff from pretty much beginning to end. I think I liked it more as it went along. I was probably a little bit more on the, I don't know what's going on here at the beginning of it. But when it got into its own, I got to learn the characters more. And the ending sequences were being set up, and finally the dominoes were kind of knocking down, and I got to introduce myself to more characters. I was really liking the story, and I kind of was turning around on it and liking it more and more as it went along. Now, I was very worried about reading this book. I told myself that I wasn't going to read this, and I told myself that because Philip Chase is a fellow booktuber, and I like him. And he's kind of one of the inspirations for me when I started my channel about people. When I went out there, I didn't just start filming. I looked out there and I said, what do I like? What do I not like? What do I want to be? And Philip Chase is one of those people. There's a few of them that I said I want to kind of emulate. Or if I could be as good as that, I would consider that a major success. And I don't know that I am in any way. I really love the way that he reviews, and he's a much smarter person than me, and attacks books in a way that I would never be able to talk about them. But nonetheless, I was worried about reading this because I didn't want to be let down by somebody that I liked, and also let down somebody that I suspect is probably going to be watching this because it's an independent author. I always kind of worry about doing independent author reviews because I always have unvarnished honesty. I will always tell you exactly what I feel about a book, no matter if it's a great book that most people don't like, or something that I perceive as a very bad book that everybody else likes. I just want to be honest. And knowing that, I was worried. And so I wasn't going to read it. But then on my Patreon, I do a thing every month where people get to pick a book for me to read. I spin a raffle wheel, and this one won. And so I had to read it. And so, here I am. Actually, no, it wasn't a Patreon. It was, I do a TBR contest. I do a lot of books that are brought up for me from somebody else. But I do a TBR contest every month. And if you correctly guess more than everybody else and you win twice, then you get to pick a book. And this was the one that was chosen. That's how it was. So I was going to do it. So in hearing some things about this book, I was very worried because I was told it was kind of more of a literary take on fantasy, and I don't like literary type of fiction. It's not something that I'm really into. And the more kind of highbrow the writing is, the less I usually like it. So yeah, very worried, but so very pleasantly surprised. It wasn't that at all. It was a different story than I suspected. It was a different writing style than I suspected, and all for the good. Nothing really blew me out of the water, but it's hard to blow me out of the water in the first book of an epic fantasy. I've mentioned before, and I'll probably mention again, and I'll mention it right now, that my favorite series of all time, Malazan, which is, I think, the greatest of epic fantasies that have ever been written, I gave the first book a 4 out of 5. It's hard to set up those pieces and do the things that I really love in a book. But the plot starts off without doing any spoilers. I like to talk about things in the first chapter or two, so I don't really spoil anything in the book. Nothing beyond that would really be said on the back cover or blurb on Amazon or something. But, we find ourselves in a very predictable scenario for an epic fantasy, one that you've probably read many books on before. We've got this boy growing up in a small little town or a village that finds out that he has magical gifts, and he finds himself thrust into this adventure to kind of save the world. In this case, to save the world from a looming holy war. How many books have you read or at least heard about that have a very similar concept? I can think of a bunch. And this does the same thing. It feels kind of more reminiscent to me to like The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill. It hits a lot of the same notes. Then it's more similar to that than something like The Lord of the Rings. I've heard that Lord of the Rings was his major inspiration for this in one of his favorite books. And I just keep hearing that connection. But I didn't really get a lot of Lord of the Rings vibes out of this, other than it's a journey story. But the journey story was different. I mean, in Lord of the Rings, you have the main characters that don't have magical powers. They are unassuming people that get thrust into this world and have to become greater than everyone else would ever think they would be. This is a more modern take on fantasy. Popularly, not a ton of people have probably read The Bound and the Broken. It's not a super popular series. Hopefully it gets that way because I love it. But think Wheel of Time is a major series that kind of hits the same kind of notes at the beginning. In this one, there is this huge emphasis on religion, but a little bit more of a black and white take on religion than I would normally like. I mean, I personally, I'm always speaking personally here about what my preferences are. And my preferences are when you tackle concepts to do things in a little bit more gray fashion. I get that that's almost too in vogue right now, where people make everything gray, and it would be nicer to have things a little bit more black and white. And the black and white stuff seems like that's what sells. Brandon Sanderson is kind of, probably the biggest fantasy author out there right now. And he writes a little bit gray, but it's mostly kind of, who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, with some small differences between. But that's what the religion is here. I mean, the people involved in this religion are the baddies, and the people that are trying to start this conflict are definitely on the wrong side of the events here. And the characters that you follow are generally really good people. And so, yeah, but how many fantasy stories start like that? The things that I like is not the predominant thing out there. But yeah, that's all I can really say about the story without ruining anything, which I don't want to ruin because I do think it's a good book and you should probably read it. The world building, I thought, was one of the better aspects to this book. I was soaked up into it. I got a EPUB version of this that had a map in it. And man, EPUB maps suck. I mean, they're almost always this horrible resolution, which was the case here. I ended up having to kind of look up the map online to be able to get a higher quality version of it to really follow what was going along. Once I got that, I got sucked in more. I'm a guy that likes maps. It really helps me visualize things. I find that I'm not as visual of a reader than most people. I need some sort of supplemental material. Otherwise, I'll gloss over a lot of stuff. But having that map around, it made me feel like I was there. And it's a big world. It's a bigger world than we're probably ever going to explore all parts of it. I love that kind of thing. I hate when maps are so zoomed in and the only things on the map are the places that we're going to go. And yeah, not my kind of thing. So this was more of the kind of thing that I liked. It was good stuff. I mean, you have this very fun aspect of multiple continents being involved, or multiple countries being involved. I like grander scale, and that's what this world really was. And it's one of those things that I will not forget. And if and when I end up reading the second book on this, that's probably the biggest thing that I'll remember from this, and I won't forget anything about the world. It's very well done and very well realized within the writing itself, and the world, and the lore, and the things that were written in here to really make you feel like you're there. The characters here, on first pass, they felt very plain. They felt kind of cookie cutter. But as the book went along, I couldn't help but feel more connected to them. And I was just enjoying them more and more as I went along. Now, this is a multi-point of view story, even though at the beginning of this, it feels kind of like it's going to end up being a single point of view. And the more of the point of views that I got, the more I liked it. Because even when I finished this, the main character of the story was probably my least favorite of the characters. I didn't dislike him, but I really did like the more, bad characters in this book. I liked, particularly, there's this king of a nation, the nation that's mostly starting the conflict in this book, and I love this character. He's not quite as evil as people are making him out to be, and that you kind of initially think he is. I mean, you feel, when you get to see things that are going on in his own head, you understand him a little bit more. You might not agree with him. I hope you don't. But you understand him. And that's what I want out of characters, especially in a more grimdark type characters. This is not a grimdark book. But the characters that kind of follow that path. He himself believes that he's doing the right thing. He himself is trying to be good, and he's failing at it. I love that kind of character. But my favorite characters actually were the ones that were on the church side of things. These are the worst of the worst. All of these people appear to be very bad hypocrites and using religion to try to take over. And, you know, it's reminiscent of history in many ways. I did appreciate those kind of those references to what we've seen in the world. I like reading about that kind of thing. And again, I almost wish they were a little toned back. I wish I could sympathize with them more, even though I don't have to agree with them. But every time that I got to one of their chapters, I found myself enjoying it more and more as we went along. The magical elements here. So you're going to have a soft magic system here. Again, I keep saying this. A lot of the things here were choices that were made that are very intentional. They probably work for most people. They're not the thing that I would personally choose if I was to, craft my perfect story. Because I do enjoy a system that's a little bit more explained, a little harder on the magic. And yeah, this one is magic's there, accept it kind of thing. Beyond the magic, you've got these classic fantasy races, you've got these elves, you've got some dwarves, you have new introductions to characters that I've never heard of before. Maybe they exist on like Dungeons & Dragons, something that I never really played, but I was not familiar with them, so it was fun. I like the mystery of hearing about something, feeling like it's kind of terrifying, and then being able to see it, which is what happens here. I also liked the different take that we had, more so on the elves than the dwarves. The dwarves felt kind of dwarfish. The elves felt different than I'm used to. The elves were not Lord of the Rings elves. They were a totally different thing. I don't want to say why they're different. I feel like that's too far into the story to spoil, but I like the take on them. It definitely subverted my expectations, which is something I want in a more tropey, classic kind of fantasy story. I want you to try to throw me for some loops. And definitely the elf aspect here. And the way, if you've read this, you know what I'm talking about. If not, I'm not spoiling anything. But the way that the elf that we meet in the beginning of the story impacts another character in this, I thought was unique. I thought it was fun. I like the way that it reoccurs later on in the story and develops as we go along. I thought it was very smart, and I liked it. So moving on to the writing style and the prose. So I felt like this is the part that impressed me the most, because what I thought I was going to get was something that went way over my head. And I hate that. I don't like pretentious writing. I say that and people get upset with me, but I'm sticking to it. I do think some people write pretentiously, and that they try to use a thesaurus when they're writing. They write in a way that nobody would ever talk, and if they did, nobody would ever like them. And they're trying to be smarter than their audience. And maybe that's not it. Maybe they're being just as smart as their audience, and I'm the dumb one. But I don't like that. This feels like the right mix between plain enough to understand everything, but also not feeling bland. It felt digestible, but that right balance between these two different, aspects of things. And yeah, so yeah, I thought I was going to get something that I was not going to enjoy, and it was very easy for me to read, but not too easy. I did feel like it was a little overly explanatory at times for my personal tastes. I suspect most people will like that aspect of it. That's the one thing that I kind of had a problem here was that it just kind of felt like it was info dumpy at times. I mean, we hear backstories on characters, and they'll tell a long story about the history of their people. And, I kind of like a little more, showing, not telling. There was a lot of telling here. And it's hard because it feels like that also helped the world building, because it felt like the world was more real. But it made me dislike the characters a little bit more, because it feels like that's not how people are in real life. People are a little bit more guarded. People don't go on these long stories telling you all this backstory. And backstory that I feel like was only there to serve the world building. And so, yeah, there's things I like about that, things I don't, but I feel like it could have reserved a little bit more and peppered it in with smaller stories that let you understand it in a more drip feed format than just kind of like throwing it on you at times. Now, this doesn't surprise me. Again, I mentioned it earlier, but I've heard that a major inspiration for this was The Lord of the Rings, which is like the hallmark for that. It's not to that level. It doesn't go off on like telling the reader from a, narrator perspective. It's characters telling another character. It just felt a little ham-fisted at times, but still good stuff. So, who should read this? I think that people would enjoy this book if they like classic fantasy. I think people would like this. I'm gonna throw out a bunch of series here that I feel like have a lot of similarities to this. If you liked the first book from The Bound and the Broken, I think you're gonna really like this. If you liked the first book from Wheel of Time, I think you're gonna really like this. I think that if you're looking for an epic fantasy story that feels like it has a lot of classic fantasy tropes with some newer world takes on those tropes, I think you're going to like this as well. And I like where it's going. I like stories that have a better ending than they do beginning. It makes me feel like I'm invested. And so, yeah, I think you should give it a shot. And I'm not saying that just because I happen to like the author. I'm just very happy that I do get to say it and that I can be honest by telling you that this is good. I endorse it. Not the greatest book I've ever read, but very few do get that title, and maybe the next one will be. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, CJ, Doused, Darren, Gregory, Jonathan, My Book is Lit, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝐿, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tahir, Anna, Andra, Angelo, Blair, Brock, Evan, Fanixan, Harry B, Joe, Kat Mick, Maria, Michael Sugarman, Sky, TW57, Wacky, and Zion. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.